Joining me now in this Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is the man himself, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good to be with you, Maria.
So, Prime Minister, you just heard what Zohran Mamdani had to say. He's calling you a war criminal. You're not welcome in New York City. We, of course, also heard from President Trump on this and many others who said this is absolutely not happening. But what are your plans? Are you still going to come to the UN General Assembly? Are you concerned about coming to New York?
No, I'm not concerned, and I certainly intend to do so. I've appeared just about every year, not every year, but almost every year in my prime ministership, unless there are security conditions. But barring that, and I don't expect that to be the case this time, yes, I do intend to come to New York.
The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for you and your former defense minister for genocide. What is your response to this?
Well, the one who promoted that was the ICC, the International Criminal Court prosecutor, who has since been completely exposed as a criminal. He himself was accused, was going to face charges of sexual harassment by 2 women. He knew that. And he was going to come to Israel, and he spoke warmly about Israel's judicial system and the fact that there has to be an extensive investigation before any conclusions are gone. And on the day that he was supposed to visit Israel, he canceled everything, called a news conference, and accused me and the former defense minister of war crimes. Now, we learned why. Because a few days before that, he was basically confronted by his chief of staff, who said, you know, these 2 employees of you, female employees of yours, are going to charge you with the sexual crimes. So he thought, how am I going to divert my criminality to something that will protect me? And the best way, he thought, was Israel bashing, and frankly, bashing me, and thereby getting the envelope, the protection of all the anti-Israel crowd. And that's basically what he did, and it worked for a while. But then the truth came out by various organizations, including the left-wing newspapers, The Guardian. And as it came out, he lost his job. He thought, if there's an indictment, I'm going to have a job. There was an indictment, and he lost his job because he was removed by a vast majority of nations who knew that he was a con job. So his name is Karim Khan. He pulled a con job on the international community with these bogus charges of war crimes on us. Now he's going to be in the dock. And I think that tells you that the whole thing that the mayor of New York is basing himself on, this criminals, bogus charges, that's what he's using. And look at what he's doing. He's fomenting hate. He's supposed to be the mayor of all New Yorkers, Jews, Christians, Muslims, everyone. But he's trying to turn one group against the other, and he's foisting hate and fear. I speak to Jewish Americans in New York, and they're afraid right now. And I don't think it's accidental that after he made this hate speech against Israel and against me, the next day, a Jew is stabbed coming out of a synagogue. I think, and with a cry of Allah is Akbar, Allah Akbar. And you know what that means. So I think that it's shameful. This thing is very bad for New York. I think it's very bad for peace. But the answer to your question, I intend to come and speak the truth, speak for Israel and for the Israeli-American alliance from the podium of the United Nations.
Well, this is a very important point that you're making, though, because this rhetoric from Zohran Mamdani is more than just talking about Israel and a personal fight that he's having with you. I'm wondering if you believe that this rhetoric is making Jewish New Yorkers unsafe. And is that what's behind so much upset and this anti-Israel sentiment raging across the country?
Well, I do think that Jews feel very uncomfortable because I speak to quite a lot of my friends, and they say, look, it's like a different world. We're afraid to go into the streets. We certainly do not want to wear yarmulkes or any clothing that would give away that we're Jews. But yes, they feel frightened, and I think that's part of this incitement language that is sweeping a lot of circles with anti-Semitism, a lot of circles in the West, in the United States, and unbelievably, in New York City, which has the 2nd largest Jewish population in the world after Israel. And I think it's wrong. The whole thing is wrong. And what are they doing? I mean, what Mamdani is supporting, his wife, his family, he celebrated October 7th massacre, the worst massacre against Jews since the Holocaust. He's basically supporting, he tries to say that he doesn't, but he's supporting the Hamas murderers who raped our women, then beheaded them, burnt babies alive, slaughtered our men, took innocent people hostages, 251 men, women, children, babies. That's who he's supporting. And they're the ones who are responsible for genocide. They would have killed, as their charter says, and as they themselves proclaimed, they would have killed every single Jew in Israel and every Jew in the world. So the genocide charge belongs to our enemies. What we're doing is try to fight this genocidal terrorist organization that embeds itself among civilians, prevents us from moving the civilians out of harm's way. They use gunpoint. That's where the real criminals are. But Mamdani is aligning himself with the criminals, with these murderers. But the worst thing is that he's tormenting his own citizens, his own voters. Yeah. No, that is wrong. And I've been to New York so many times, Maria, over the years. I've met all the New York mayors. They all saw themselves as mayors of all New Yorkers, not pitting one part of the population against the other.
Of course. Mr. Prime Minister, let me move on to the war, where we saw the highest, really, hostilities yet in the last week. What will it take to end this war?
I think it will, what will it take? It will take for Iran to understand, either for this regime to fall, or for Iran to realize that the cost of wreaking economic chaos to the world, murdering its thousands of its own citizens, and shooting at everyone. I mean, literally at everyone. At Saudi Arabia, at Bahrain, at Qatar, at Kuwait, at the UAE, at Israel, at Jordan, every single one. I mean, this is what this regime is doing when they don't have nuclear weapons. So imagine what they would do if they had nuclear weapons. I think when this regime is either toppled or it's sufficiently weakened that it knows it has to end its nuclear program and has to change its course. That's really what President Trump is trying to achieve, and I back his fully his efforts to do so. If he can do so without returning to intense military fighting, that's fine. Why not? But one way or the other, they have to end their nuclear program. And with a deal or without a deal, that has to come to an end.
How far back do you believe Iran's nuclear program has been set back since this fighting began at the end of February?
Quite a bit. I mean, we knocked out 20 of their chief nuclear scientists in the two operations that we did with the United States, 20 leading nuclear scientists. We knocked out a lot of their facilities. It doesn't mean that they can't try to reconstruct, but we pushed them back a good few years. That's important. Because just imagine, I mean, what would happen if this regime that chants death to America, that's their real goal, death to America, if they had nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them to where you're sitting right now, Maria, to New York or to Washington or to any city in the United States, this would be a mortal peril to every citizen in the United States. And obviously, President Trump and I are both committed to prevent this danger to the United States, to the peace of the world, and to Israel. And I can tell you that we'll pursue all the means to prevent that. So yes, we pushed it back, but it doesn't mean that you can't have the attempt to restore it. And we have to be on the constant watch so it doesn't happen.
And you're getting set to travel to the U.S. to meet with President Trump and then attend the funeral services of Senator Lindsey Graham. Prime Minister, what can you tell us about any fresh new intelligence that you may have about that nuclear program that you are about to present President Trump with?
Well, first let me say that Lindsey Graham is a terrible loss. He was such a great friend, such a champion of America and a patriot, and such a champion of the Israeli-American alliance. He believed in the benefits that Israel gives to the United States in terms of intel, weapons technology, and of course we appreciated very much all the help that we got from the United States. So he was an extraordinary American patriot, and we miss him greatly. As far as the nuclear program, we constantly exchange information. Our intel services and yours are working so close together that it's not that I'm going to present new information, but I think it's a good thing to have the opportunity to sit with our good friend President Trump and to hear what he has in mind, because I think in many ways it's his decision. But let me say one thing, and I think I should say it very, very clearly. If Iran attacks Israel, either directly or through proxies, either with ballistic missiles or UAVs or killer drones, it will make a terrible mistake, because our response, Israel's response, will be very, very forceful.
Prime Minister, Lebanon is also a key central to Israel's long-term security. I want to get your take on the meeting in the White House with the president of Lebanon last week and your thoughts on whether or not he can be a positive in this fight.
Well, first of all, I think we've already had a positive development, because remember, Hezbollah, that basically holds Lebanon hostage, had taken over the south of the country that borders on Israel. And they were going to invade us like the Hamas did on October 7th. They were going to do it actually with a force a lot bigger. They prepared terror tunnels. They had terror installations along the border. And we pushed them back. We pushed them back by 5 to 8 miles away from our border, destroyed a lot of these terror tunnels. And they were in a position to fire directly anti-tank missiles right into our living rooms across the border. Actually, they did that. So we prevented that from happening. I think we weakened Hezbollah a lot. They had 150,000 missiles and rockets, the greatest concentration of such projectiles on the planet aimed against Israel. We knocked out about 94% of that. So that's good for Israel, good for peace, good for Lebanon. But it's still there. We talked to the Lebanese government with America's good offices in Washington, led by the president and Secretary Rubio, and we got a deal. And the deal says openly, for the first time in decades, Israelis and Lebanese are talking directly to one another. And the deal was, we push back Hezbollah, we demilitarize Lebanon, we disarm Hezbollah, and we make peace. And I think the fact that this deal was put forward is a great advance. It shows that Hezbollah's ability to intimidate Lebanon's government and its president has been sharply reduced. Now, whether or not the Lebanese army can take over the areas that we clear up from Hezbollah, that remains to be seen. But we're willing to give it a try, and I think that it's on the whole a positive development, and may lead to another peace treaty between Israel and an Arab country.
Wow. Well, that's what I want to ask you about the Abraham Accords. But first, let me ask you this, because many Israelis are deeply divided on what your government is doing in the response to this. What do you want to say to critics who may not understand what you're seeing in terms of this ongoing war?
I think there's a lot more unity in the country than appears in the various statements by politicians. Most Israelis understand we have to fight Hezbollah. We're doing that, by the way, with an incredible ratio of 5 terrorists killed for every civilian killed. That's unheard of. And we do it because we precision target the terrorists. Hezbollah, like Hamas, embeds itself among civilians, but we've been able to reduce that ratio in Gaza, because the last thing we want is genocide. In fact, we want to hit the terrorists, not the civilians that they use as human shields. And we're very successful in doing that in Lebanon. Most Israelis understand that we have to keep the security zone that we have now alongside the Israeli border on the Lebanese side in order to prevent a new invasion attempt by Hezbollah terrorists. And most support our efforts to reach a peace with Lebanon. So I would think there's a lot more unity among Israelis than meets the eye. And if I'm elected again, we're going to have elections in a few months, I intend to create a broad national government that will give expression to that unity in the next government.
And Prime Minister, I want to get your take on this Saudi deal over a nuclear deal with the U.S. Israel was concerned in the past about Saudi Arabia's ability to enrich uranium, but President Trump has done this civilian nuclear deal program with the Saudis on the condition that Saudi Arabia join the Abraham Accords. Are you expecting that? And what is your assessment of this nuclear deal?
Well, first of all, I think President Trump was absolutely right in stating that condition, that Saudi Arabia would get a civilian nuclear program in exchange for normalization of relations with Israel. I stress civilian because the last thing we want, and I'm sure the last thing the president wants, is a military program, nuclear program in Saudi Arabia. Can we have this? Yes, I think it's possible. Remember that we had 4 peace agreements between Israel and Arab nations, brokered by President Trump, with my working together with me. It's a great achievement, historic achievement, and obviously we'll be delighted if we could extend it to Saudi Arabia and other countries. And I think if we weaken Iran further, we will.
Which countries are you expecting to join the Abraham Accord, sir?
The ones that I want to join, I will not. I won't reduce the probability of their joining by exposing them here. But I can tell you that we have. Well, Maria, I'll tell you this. You know, everybody says Israel is isolated. It's not isolated. I mean, many countries in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, even in Europe, many countries are coming to us because they want to share our technology, civilian technology. They want to benefit from our military prowess and technology.
Yes.
And there are now contacts with several Arab countries in the Middle East, but because I want to advance those contacts, I'd rather reserve my answer to a future appearance on your show.
Well, and we want you back. But real quick before you go, Mr. Prime Minister, the anti-Semitism in the Democrat Party, are you worried about losing the Democrat Party? Does it pose a risk to Israeli-U.S. relations? Real quick, sir.
Yeah, I'm very concerned with that, obviously, because I think a bipartisan support for Israel is important, very important for us. But I'll tell you what I'm worried about most. I'm worried about the reasons that leading Democrats have said privately. One of them said it actually publicly, of why they joined the radical fringe. And the reason is that their family has been harassed, that they're afraid of being tailed everywhere and being intimidated by this radical fringe. So I think that's really something that should worry every American. You don't want legislators taking their position because of personal intimidation. That's bad. Yes, I worry about it.
Mr. Prime Minister, good to have you this morning. We so appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.